They called her the Turtle. To the arrogant doctors, Martha was just the limping old nurse who mopped floors and took insults in silence. She was the woman you overlooked. But on a storm-lashed night in Seattle, the ER doors were breached by 6 Delta Force operators moving like predators. The hospital froze in terror, expecting a raid. But when the giant commander walked up to the old woman with the mop, he didn't pull a weapon. He dropped to one knee, and when he said, "We found you, Shepherd," the truth about Martha exploded. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a warrior, and she was about to turn this quiet hospital into a battlefield. The rain in Seattle does not simply fall. It occupies the city like an invading army. It was a relentless vertical sheet of gray that blurred the neon lights of Pike Place Market and turned the waters of Elliott Bay into a churning cauldron of black ink. Tonight, the storm was particularly vicious, hammering against the glass walls of St. Jude Memorial Hospital, located right on the edge of Pier 54. The wind howled off the Puget Sound, carrying the scent of salt and ozone, rattling the automatic doors of the emergency room as if demanding entry. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz that only the exhausted seemed to hear. Martha Caldwell moved through the sterile white corridors with a rhythmic, uneven gait. Step, drag, step, drag. At 62, Martha was the kind of woman people looked at without truly seeing. She was built sturdy, with broad shoulders hidden under layers of unfashionable scrubs, and her gray hair was pulled back into a messy, utilitarian bun, held together by a cheap plastic clip. Her most defining feature, according to the young staff, was her speed, or lack thereof. They called her the Turtle behind her back, mocking the orthopedic shoes that squeaked softly on the linoleum. She was currently mopping a spill in the center of the trauma bay, her back hunched in silent labor. Dr. Julian Thorne stood over her, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. At 30, Thorne was the golden boy of St. Jude. He was handsome in a sharp, angular way, with perfectly styled dark hair and a jawline that seemed chiseled from marble. He was brilliant, undeniably talented, and possessed an ego large enough to require its own zip code. "Faster, Martha!" "Good Lord," Thorne snapped, not looking up from his tablet. "My patient in Bay 3 needs that chart, not a floor show of your incompetence. Why does the hospital even keep you on the payroll? You move like you're wading through molasses." Martha paused, her hand gripping the mop handle. Her knuckles were swollen with arthritis, but the grip was iron hard. She didn't look up. She focused on the reflection of the lights in the puddle of spilled coffee. "The floor is slippery, doctor," Martha said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp that sounded like dry leaves scraping over stone. "I didn't want you to fall." Thorne let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "I don't fall, Martha. I have balance. I have precision. Unlike some people who can barely navigate a flat surface without wheezing." He stepped around her, deliberately kicking the wet floor sign so it spun on the tiles. The nurses at the station, young, bright-eyed girls with colorful lanyards, giggled behind their hands. Martha didn't flinch. She simply reached out, righted the sign, and continued mopping. She had been insulted by generals in war rooms and screamed at by dying men in mud-filled craters. The arrogance of a boy with a medical degree was nothing more than the buzzing of a fly. Once the floor was dry, Martha made her way toward the main entrance. The automatic doors whooshed open, letting in a blast of freezing damp air. Huddled in the corner of the waiting area, trying to make himself as small as possible on the hard plastic chairs, was old Gus. Gus was a fixture of the waterfront, a homeless Vietnam veteran with a beard like tangled wire and a coat that smelled of wet wool and stale tobacco. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering in a rhythm that matched the rain against the glass. Martha blocked the view of the security guard with her wide body. She reached into the deep pocket of her scrub top and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped package and a chemical heat pack. "Easy, Gus," she whispered, slipping the items into his trembling hands. 600 milligrams of ibuprofen for the fever. Crack the heat pack and put it against your chest, under the coat. It'll stop the shakes." Gus looked up. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but for a moment they seemed to clear. He didn't see the limping old woman. He saw something else, a shadow that stood taller than the room allowed. "Thank you, Commander." Gus wheezed, clutching her wrist with a desperate strength. Martha gently peeled his fingers away. Her expression softened, the hard lines of her face relaxing for a fraction of a second. "Hush now," she murmured. "Just Maddie, just a nurse. You know the rules, Gus." "I know," the old man mumbled, tucking the heat pack into his shirt. "But the wolves are howling tonight, ma'am. I can feel 'em. You be ready." "I'm always ready," she said, though she hoped he was wrong. She turned back to the ER floor. The storm outside intensified. A crack of thunder shook the building, sounding like an artillery shell detonating on the roof. Near the pediatric station, a golden retriever named Barnaby let out a high-pitched yelp. Barnaby was the hospital's therapy dog, usually a beacon of calm, with soft fur and soulful brown eyes. But the thunder had broken him. He was thrashing against his leash, claws scrambling on the tiles, eyes wide with primal panic. "He's freaking out!" yelled Lily, a 22-year-old nursing intern with flushed cheeks and a nervous disposition. She was tugging on the leash, making it worse. "Someone get the sedative! He's going to bite a patient!" Dr. Thorne strode over, a syringe already in hand. "Hold him down. If he's a liability, he needs to be crated or sedated. I don't have time for a panic attack from a canine." "No drugs!" a voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't a shout, but it carried a weight that made Lily freeze. Martha stepped into the circle. She dropped her mop bucket. She didn't limp this time. She moved with a strange, fluid economy of motion. She knelt beside the thrashing dog. Thorne sneered. "Careful, Turtle. He'll take your hand off." Martha ignored him. She didn't grab the dog. She placed her forehead directly against the animal's forehead. Her left hand moved to the base of Barnaby's skull, her thumb pressing into a specific nerve cluster behind the ear. Her right hand went to the dog's chest, directly over the racing heart. She began to hum. It wasn't a song, it was a low-frequency vibration, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from her diaphragm rather than her throat. It was the delta hum, a technique she had used in the belly of Black Hawk helicopters to ground soldiers who were going into shock, a way to synchronize their breathing with hers over the roar of rotors. Thrum, thrum. The effect was instantaneous. Barnaby's eyes rolled back from white terror to heavy-lidded calm. His breathing hitched, then slowed to match Martha's. His body went limp, melting into the floor. The ER went silent. Even the monitors seemed to quiet down. Martha stood up slowly, her knees popping audibly. She patted the dog's head once. "He's fine. Just noise sensitivity. Keep him away from the windows." Thorne stared at her, the syringe still in his hand, looking confused and vaguely annoyed that she had solved the problem without chemicals. "Lucky trick," he muttered, turning away. But the silence didn't last. The air pressure in the room dropped. It was a physical sensation, like the moment before a bomb goes off. The hair on Martha's arms stood up. She turned toward the main doors, her eyes narrowing behind her thick glasses. "Gus was right," she whispered to herself. Whoosh! The automatic doors were breached. They didn't just open. They were forced apart by a gust of wind and 6 figures who entered the light. They moved like liquid shadows. 6 men. They were dressed in civilian tactical gear. Dark rain jackets, cargo pants that soaked up the water, and heavy boots that made no sound on the floor. They were soaked to the bone, water dripping from their broad shoulders to form pools on the floor Martha had just cleaned. They carried duffel bags that looked heavy enough to contain bodies. The leader was a giant of a man. Colonel Hawk Sterling stood 6'4", a mountain of muscle and scar tissue. A jagged white line ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight in Yemen. His eyes were the color of steel and just as cold. The entire ER froze. The security guard, a retired cop named Earl, put a hand on his taser but didn't draw it. His instincts told him that drawing a weapon on these men would be the last thing he ever did. Dr. Thorne, recovering his composure, puffed out his chest and marched toward them. "Hey, you can't just barge in here," Thorne shouted, his voice echoing shrilly. "Use the side entrance. This is a sterile zone, and you are dripping mud all over my floor. Security! Get these men out." Thorne reached out to grab the leader's arm. It happened in a blur. Colonel Hawk Sterling didn't break stride. He simply extended one massive arm and swept Dr. Thorne aside. It wasn't a strike, it was the way a human brushes aside a cobweb. Thorne flew backward, crashing into the nurse's station counter with a gasp of shock. Hawk didn't look at the doctor. His eyes were scanning the room, ignoring the terrified nurses, the beeping machines, and the stunned patients. He stopped when he saw the old woman with the mop. Martha stood alone in the center of the trauma bay. She looked small, frail, and utterly out of place, but she didn't back away. She dropped the mop handle. It clattered loudly on the floor. Clack! She stood straight. The slouch she had worn for 15 years vanished. Her chin lifted. Her hands ceased their trembling. Hawk walked up to her. The water from his jacket dripped onto her orthopedic shoes. He towered over her, a figure of pure lethal potential. Then, he did the unthinkable. The giant commander lowered himself. He went down on one knee in the dirty water, bowing his head in a gesture of absolute, terrifying reverence. The 5 men behind him dropped to their knees in unison, like knights before a queen. "We checked 5 hospitals," Hawk said, his voice rough with smoke and exhaustion. "They said you were dead." "I am dead, Hawk," Martha replied. Her voice had changed. The gravel was gone, replaced by the cold, sharp edge of a scalpel. "Martha the surgeon died in Kandahar 20 years ago." Hawk looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "We found you, ma'am," he whispered, a plea from a man who never begged. "We found the shepherd." Echo took a sniper round to the chest. "He's bleeding out in the van. The extraction team is compromised. We have nowhere else." He paused, swallowing hard. "Please, give the order." Martha looked at the kneeling soldiers. She looked at Dr. Thorne, who was staring at her with his mouth open. She looked at the rain lashing against the windows. She reached up and pulled the plastic clip from her hair. Her gray locks fell loose around her shoulders. She took off her thick glasses and set them on the crash cart. "Bring him in," Martha commanded. Her voice filled the room, authoritative and undeniable. "And lock the damn doors." The sliding doors of the ER locked with a mechanical thud, sealing the storm outside. But inside Trauma Bay 1, a different kind of hurricane had just made landfall. "Move! We're losing him!" The shout came from one of the Delta operators, a man named Tex. He was shorter than Colonel Hawk, but wider, built like a fire hydrant made of granite, with a thick beard that dripped rainwater onto the pristine hospital floor. He and another operator slammed a tactical stretcher onto the trauma bed. The wheels screeched in protest. On the litter lay Sergeant Echo. He was young, painfully young, perhaps no older than 25. His face was the color of wet parchment, lips blue, eyes rolled back in his head. But it was his chest that drew every eye in the room. His tactical vest had been cut away, revealing a catastrophic ruin of flesh and bone. A sniper's bullet had shattered his sternum, creating a sucking chest wound that hissed with every ragged, shallow breath he took. It was the sound of a drowning man, only he was drowning in his own blood. Dr. Julian Thorne stared at the wound. For the first time in his career, the arrogance that usually armored him like a second skin cracked. He took a step back, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. This is a grade 5 thoracic injury," Thorne stammered, his voice rising an octave. He looked at the cardiac monitor, which was screaming a high-pitched warning. "BP is 60 over pulp. Heart rate is 140 and thready. We can't handle this here. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the blood supply." Thorne turned to the unit clerk, his eyes wide with panic. "Call Mercy General. Tell them we have a transfer. Get the chopper. I am not having this man die on my watch. It's a liability." It was a sensible decision for a civilian doctor. It was a death sentence for the soldier. "Cancel that call!" a voice cut through the panic. Martha Caldwell didn't walk to the bedside. She marched. The limp that had defined her existence at St. Jude for 15 years was gone, replaced by a terrifying, predatory grace. She kicked the brake on the stretcher, locking it in place. Thorne spun around, his face flushed. "Martha, get back to your station. You are a nurse, and you are interfering with a—" Smack. The sound was sharp and shocking, echoing off the tiled walls. Martha had slapped Dr. Julian Thorne across the face. It wasn't a strike of anger. It was a tactical reset, the kind used to snap a hysterical soldier back to reality in a foxhole. Thorne froze, his hand flying to his cheek, his mouth open in disbelief. The entire ER went dead silent. "Wash your hands, doctor," Martha said. Her voice was low, devoid of emotion and absolute. "Stop thinking about your insurance premiums and look at the patient. He has 3 minutes before he bleeds out. Mercy General is 20 minutes away. You transfer him, you kill him. Tonight, you are not the attending. You are my assistant." You struck me," Thorne whispered, shell-shocked. "And if you don't glove up in 10 seconds, I'll do a lot worse," Martha promised. She turned her back on him, dismissing him as a threat. She looked down at Echo. The young soldier let out a gurgling gasp. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "I've got you, son," Martha whispered. She didn't wait for instruments. She didn't wait for anesthesia. She reached out and ripped the remaining shreds of Echo's thermal shirt open, exposing the devastation. Blood pumped rhythmically from a severed artery, painting the white sheets in bright, arterial red. "Ma'am, he's crashing," Tex yelled, gripping the bed rails until his knuckles turned white. Martha closed her eyes for a split second, visualizing the anatomy she hadn't touched in 2 decades. The map was still there, burned into her mind by trauma and adrenaline. She opened her eyes. They were clear, cold, and focused. She plunged her bare right hand directly into the open wound in Echo's chest. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a violation of every sterile protocol in modern medicine. It was primal. It was barbaric. But it worked. Martha's fingers, swollen with arthritis yet steady as stone, dived past the shattered ribs, past the collapsing lung, and found the subclavian artery. She pinched it against the first rib. The fountain of blood stopped instantly. "I have control," Martha stated calmly, standing there with her arm buried wrist-deep in a man's chest. "Pressure is holding." In the corner of the room, near the supply cabinets, a soft, sobbing sound broke the tension. Lily, the 22-year-old nursing intern with strawberry blonde hair and a heart too soft for the ER, was sliding down the wall. She was clutching a tray of gauze to her chest, hyperventilating. The sight of the blood, the violence of the entry, and Martha's hand inside a human body had broken her. I can't, Lily wheezed. Martha didn't move her hand from Echo's chest, but she turned her head. She fixed Lily with a gaze that was stern, but not unkind. "Lily," Martha barked. The girl jumped, her eyes locking onto Martha's. "Look at me," Martha commanded. "Do not look at the blood. Look at me. I need you to go to the Pyxis machine. I need 4 vials of propofol, 2 of fentanyl, and the intubation kit with a Mach 3 blade. Can you do that?" Lily. Martha softened her voice just a fraction. "He is somebody's son. He needs you to be brave for 10 seconds. Go." The specific instruction cut through the panic. Lily nodded, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and scrambled to her feet. The paralysis broke. She ran toward the medication dispenser. "Good girl," Martha murmured. But the peace was short-lived. Dr. Thorne had recovered from the slap. The shock had worn off, replaced by a surge of professional indignation and fear. He saw an unsterile nurse with her hand inside a patient's thoracic cavity. He saw a lawsuit. He saw the end of his career. "Get away from him!" Thorne shouted, grabbing a scalpel from the sterile tray nearby. He held it awkwardly, like a pen, his hand shaking. "You're contaminating the field. You're going to kill him with sepsis. I am the surgeon here. Move aside, Martha, or I will have security remove you." He stepped forward, the scalpel gleaming under the harsh lights. He reached for Martha's arm, intending to pull her hand out of the wound. Colonel Hawk stepped forward, his hand dropping to the holster at his hip, but Martha was faster. She didn't pull her right hand from the artery. She kept that pressure constant, a lifeline she refused to sever. But as Thorne reached for her, she pivoted her body. Her left hand shot out. She didn't grab his wrist. She struck the radial nerve cluster on his forearm. Thorne's hand spasmed, and the scalpel clattered to the floor. Before he could cry out, Martha stepped into his personal space. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back in a joint lock that forced him to bend forward, slamming his face against the tiled wall next to the oxygen monitor. "Ah, my arm!" Thorne shrieked. Martha leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. She wasn't shouting. She was whispering, and it was the most terrifying sound Julian Thorne had ever heard. "In this room, my word is law," Martha hissed. You hold a scalpel like a schoolboy holding a pencil. You were about to cut blindly into a field you haven't assessed. If you had pulled my hand out, the drop in blood pressure would have killed him in 4 seconds. She applied a fraction more pressure to his wrist. Thorne whimpered, his knees buckling. I don't care about your title, doctor. I don't care about your ego. Tonight, I am the lead surgeon. You are the instrument. If you cut 1 millimeter wrong because you are scared or angry, this boy dies. And if he dies because of your vanity, I will break your arm for real. Do you understand? Yes, yes, God, yes! Thorne gasped, sweat beading on his forehead. Martha released him abruptly. Thorne stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, looking at the old nurse with a mixture of horror and awe. He looked at her blood-soaked arm, at the fierce intelligence in her eyes, and realized he had never actually met Martha Caldwell until this moment. Good, Martha said, turning back to the patient without missing a beat. Now, pick up that scalpel, sterilize it, and get over here. I'm going to teach you how to clamp a subclavian artery in the dark. Thorne swallowed hard. He looked at the Delta operators standing guard, their faces grim. He looked at Lily, who was rushing back with the meds. He picked up a fresh scalpel. His hand was still shaking, but he stepped up to the table. Ready, ma'am, Thorne said, his voice quiet. Blade, Martha ordered. Outside, the thunder roared again, shaking the hospital to its foundations. But inside, Trauma Bay 1, the only thing that mattered was the steady hands of the shepherd. The emergency room of St. Jude Memorial had transformed. It was no longer a place of paperwork, insurance claims, or waiting times. It had become a forward operating base, a sanctuary carved out of the chaos by the sheer will of one woman. Hemostat. Now. Martha Caldwell did not ask. She commanded. Her voice was a flat line of absolute focus, cutting through the ambient noise of the storm hammering the glass. Dr. Julian Thorne slapped the metal instrument into her outstretched palm. He moved with a clumsiness that shamed him, his hands trembling inside the latex gloves. Just an hour ago, he had been the king of this domain, looking down on Martha as she mopped the floor. Now, he was a fumbling apprentice, sweating profusely as he tried to keep pace with a master. Martha worked with a speed that defied logic. To the untrained eye, it might have looked frantic. To Thorne, it was a terrifyingly beautiful dance. Her hands, usually seen holding a mop or a coffee pot, were now deep inside the chest cavity of Sergeant Echo. She wasn't just stopping the bleeding. She was navigating a minefield of shredded tissue and shattered bone. Retract the rib cage further, doctor, Martha ordered, not looking up. I need visibility on the aortic arch. I can't get a good angle, Thorne stammered, straining against the retractor. The damage is too extensive. The tissue is friable. Don't tell me what it is. Tell me what you're going to do about it, Martha snapped. Adjust your grip. Use your body weight. Lean in. Thorne obeyed. He leaned in, peering into the gruesome cavern of the soldier's chest. What he saw made his breath hitch. Martha had identified a nick in the aorta, a death sentence in 99% of cases, and she was preparing to suture it. 3-0 Proline on a curved needle, she requested. Lily, the intern who had been hyperventilating moments ago, handed the suture kit to Martha with a shaky but determined hand. Martha took it without breaking her rhythm. Watch closely, Julian, Martha said, using his first name for the first time. It wasn't a gesture of intimacy. It was a summons to pay attention. You don't stitch this like a laceration. You stitch it like you're mending a parachute at 20,000 feet. Continuous lock stitch. If you hesitate, the pressure blows it out. Thorne watched, mesmerized. Martha's arthritic knuckles seemed to vanish, replaced by fluid, precise movements. She threw the sutures with a dexterity that Thorne had only read about in textbooks referencing the great surgeons of the past century. How? Thorne whispered, the question escaping him before he could stop it. You're a nurse. You bring the donuts. How do you know this? Martha didn't pause. I know this because I learned it in the back of a Chinook helicopter while taking fire over the Petch River Valley. I learned it when the lights went out, and the only thing guiding my hands was the heat of the blood. She tightened the final knot. The bleeding slowed to a manageable ooze. Suction, she ordered. While the battle for Echo's life raged inside the trauma bay, a different kind of war was beginning, just outside the sliding glass doors. Old Gus was huddled in the alcove of the ambulance bay, seeking shelter from the biting wind. The heat pack Martha had given him was pressed against his chest, a small circle of warmth in a freezing world. He was half dozing, lulled by the rhythmic pounding of the rain, when the sound of tires on wet asphalt made him snap his eyes open. It wasn't an ambulance. 3 black cargo vans screeched to a halt at the curb, blocking the emergency lane. They didn't have markings. They didn't have lights. They just sat there, dark, humming monoliths in the rain. Gus sat up, his old soldier's instincts screaming. He squinted through his cataracts. The side doors of the vans slid open, and men poured out. They weren't doctors. They wore dark rain ponchos and carried long, rigid cases that Gus recognized immediately. Weapons. "Oh no," Gus whispered. He scrambled to his feet, his joints popping. "Not here, not tonight." He looked toward the glass doors of the ER. He could see the blurred shapes of the security guard, Earl, at the desk. Gus filled his lungs, preparing to shout, to warn them, to do something. "Incoming!" Gus roared, his voice cracking with age but driven by desperation. "Lock the doors! They're here!" He didn't get to scream a second time. A hand, gloved in black leather, clamped over his mouth from behind. Gus hadn't even heard the man approach. He was yanked backward with brutal efficiency. A second man stepped out of the shadows, holding a black hood. Gus struggled, kicking out with his worn boots, but he was a malnourished old man fighting professional killers. He saw the face of the man holding the hood, cold, dead eyes, a scar running through his eyebrow. A mercenary. "Quiet, Grandpa," the man hissed. The hood was shoved over Gus's head. The world went black. He felt a sharp prick in his neck, a sedative, and his legs gave out. They dragged him toward the vans like a sack of garbage, tossing him into the back. The last thing Gus heard before consciousness faded was the metallic click-clack of assault rifles being loaded. Back inside Trauma Bay 1, the atmosphere had shifted from frantic activity to a heavy, suffocating tension. "The bleeding is controlled," Thorne announced, checking the monitors. He sounded exhausted but awestruck. "BP is stabilizing, 90/60. Jesus, Martha, you saved him." Martha didn't celebrate. She was wiping blood from her glasses with a piece of gauze. "We bought him time, that's all. We need to stabilize him for transport." Thorne looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. "Colonel Hawk called you the Shepherd." "Why?" Martha paused. She looked down at Echo, whose chest was rising and falling rhythmically now. "In the Bible, people think the shepherd is a gentle figure," Martha said softly, her voice carrying a weight of sorrow that filled the room. "They think of green pastures and still waters, but in the mountains of Afghanistan, a shepherd is the only thing standing between the flock and the wolves." She looked up at Thorne, her blue eyes piercing him. "I wasn't a soldier, Julian. I didn't carry a gun to hunt. My job wasn't to kill the wolves. My job was to carry the lambs home when they were torn apart, even if I had to carry them through hell, even if I had to leave pieces of myself behind to do it." Thorne fell silent, humbled. He understood now. The limp. The silence. The tolerance of his abuse. It wasn't weakness. It was the scar tissue of a woman who had carried too many bodies. Suddenly, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the cardiac monitor changed. Beep! The sound was a flat, singular note that froze the blood in everyone's veins. "Assistole!" Lily screamed. "He's flatlining!" "No," Martha growled. "Not now, not after all this." Thorne grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Charging to 200! Useless!" Martha slapped the paddles away. "He has no blood volume to circulate. The shock won't reset the rhythm. We have to pump it manually." Before Thorne could protest, Martha reached back into the open chest cavity. She wrapped her hand around the soldier's heart. It was still, a motionless muscle in her palm. She squeezed. It was a brutal physical act. She squeezed the heart, forcing blood out into the arteries, then released to let it fill. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. "Come on, Echo," Martha grunted, sweat pouring down her face. "Don't you quit on me. Fight!" "Push one of Epi," she yelled at Lily. "Pushing Epi!" Martha pumped the heart. Her arm muscles burned. Her back screamed in agony. But she kept the rhythm, staying alive, Staying alive. Come on, she roared, and then the lights went out. It wasn't a flicker, it was a hard cut. The overhead fluorescence died, the monitors went black. The hum of the ventilation system ceased. The hospital was plunged into absolute pitch darkness. "The power!" Thorne yelled in the dark. "The backup generators should have kicked in." "They didn't," Colonel Hawk's voice came from the doorway. "Because the lines were cut. They're inside." Panic began to rise in the room, a palpable wave of terror. "I can't see," Lily cried. "I can't see the IV." "Quiet!" Martha's voice was the anchor in the dark. "I have the heart. I can feel it. I don't need eyes to feel." Click. A beam of blinding white light cut through the darkness. Then another. And another. The Delta Force operators had activated their weapon-mounted tactical lights. 5 beams of concentrated lumens converged on the center of the room, illuminating only the operating table. The effect was haunting. The rest of the room was swallowed in shadow, but the open chest of Sergeant Echo and Martha's blood-slicked hands were bathed in a stark, heavenly spotlight. Dust motes danced in the beams like stars. "Keep pumping, Shepard," Hawk said, his weapon raised toward the door. "We have the light. You give him the life." Martha squeezed. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Under the harsh glare of the tactical lights, the heart in her hand gave a sudden, convulsive jerk, then a flutter, then a strong, independent beat. Thump, thump. "He's back," Martha whispered, collapsing against the side of the bed, her hand still inside the chest, feeling the miracle of a returning rhythm. "He's back." From the hallway, the sound of breaking glass and suppressed gunfire echoed. The wolves were no longer at the door. They were in the house. The silence following the miracle of Sergeant Echo's restarted heart lasted exactly 12 seconds. It was a fragile, holy silence, broken only by the rhythmic whoosh hiss of the ventilator bag Lily was squeezing and the drumming of rain against the roof. Then the building shook. It wasn't thunder. It was a concussive blast from the front entrance, a dull thump that vibrated through the floor tiles and rattled the instruments on the trays. "Breach," Colonel Hawk stated. His voice was devoid of panic, dropping into a low, tactical register. "They just blew the mag locks on the main doors. We have contact." "How many?" Martha asked. She was wiping the blood from her hands onto her scrub pants, her eyes darting around the room, assessing exits. "Standard syndicate kill team," Hawk replied, checking the load in his rifle. 4 to 6 tangos, heavy armor, no rules of engagement. They're here to sanitize the site." "Sanitize?" Dr. Thorne repeated, his face losing the little color it had regained. "It means they kill everyone." Tex, the bearded Delta operator, grunted as he strapped Echo securely to the tactical litter. "Witnesses, patients, janitors. No loose ends." Thorne looked at the door of the trauma bay as if it were made of paper. We have patients in the waiting room. We have Mrs. Higgins in bed 4. We have a pregnant woman in the triage hallway." "We can't save everyone if we stay here," Martha cut in. The shepherd was back. "We have to split the flock." She turned to Lily. The young intern was trembling again, but she was still squeezing the ventilator bag, keeping Echo alive. "Lily," Martha said, gripping the girl's shoulder, "listen to me. You are the senior nurse for the patients now. I need you to take Mrs. Higgins, the pregnant woman, and anyone who can walk. Go to the 4th floor, maternity. It has reinforced doors and no windows facing the street. Lock yourselves in the nursery. Do not open the door for anyone but me or the police. Do you understand?" "But what about you?" Lily whispered, tears welling up. "I'm going to take the wolves for a walk," Martha said, a grim smile touching her lips. "Now go. Move." Lily nodded, a newfound resolve hardening her features. She handed the ventilator bag to Thorne, grabbed a handful of supplies, and ran out the side door toward the patient bays. "We need to move the package," Hawk said, gesturing to Echo. "Basement is a dead end, ma'am. If they trap us down there, we're done." "The basement is a maze," Martha corrected him. "And I know where all the Minotaurs live. The maintenance tunnels connect to the old laundry chute system. We can circle back behind them or exit through the drainage outflow if we have to. It's the only way to draw them away from the civilians." Hawk studied her for a second, then nodded. "Your lead, Shepard. Tex, take point. Breaker, rear guard." Hawk reached into his waistband and pulled out a spare sidearm, a Sig Sauer P320. He thrust it toward Dr. Thorne. "You, Doctor, you ever fire a weapon?" Thorne stared at the black metal object, as if it were a venomous snake. His hands, which had just learned to suture an aorta, were shaking violently. He reached out, his fingers fumbling. He held the gun like a dead fish, muzzle pointing dangerously toward his own foot. I went to a range once, for a bachelor party," Thorne stammered. "I missed the target." "Jesus," Tex muttered. Martha stepped between them. Her hand moved with a blur of motion, snatching the pistol from Thorne's limp grip. "He carries the life," Martha said, shoving a heavy bag of O-negative blood and the portable ventilator into Thorne's arms. "I carry the death." She didn't hold the gun like a civilian. She racked the slide to check the chamber, pressed checks the magazine, and deactivated the safety in one fluid motion. Her grip was high and tight, her stance widening instinctively. The arthritic tremble in her hands vanished, replaced by the rigid tension of muscle memory. "I haven't shot in 20 years, Martha murmured, weighing the weapon. "Let's hope it's like riding a bike." "Let's move," Hawk ordered. They burst out of the trauma bay into the main ER hallway. The emergency lights bathed the corridor in a blood-red glow. Smoke from the exploded front doors was drifting down the hall, smelling of cordite and burning plastic. At the far end of the corridor, near the reception desk, a shadow emerged from the smoke. He was huge, dressed in black tactical armor that looked like insect chitin. He wore a ballistic face mask that hid his humanity. He wasn't rushing. He was moving with the terrifying confidence of a man who knows he is the apex predator. He raised a suppressed assault rifle. Dr. Thorne gasped, freezing in the middle of the hallway. "Oh, God!" The mercenary saw them. He adjusted his aim, the laser sight sweeping toward the gurney where Echo lay. Martha didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about her hip or the ache in her back. She stepped out from behind the cover of the crash cart, planting her feet. She exhaled. Pop, pop, 2 shots, a double tap. The sound was deafening in the confined space. The first round hit the mercenary in the center of his chest plate. It didn't penetrate the heavy ceramic armor, but the kinetic energy staggered him, knocking the wind out of his lungs and throwing his aim off. The second round didn't hit the chest. Martha had adjusted the recoil instantly. The second bullet struck the mercenary in the throat, just above the armor line, in the soft gap between the collar and the helmet. A spray of dark mist erupted in the red light. The mercenary dropped his rifle, clutching his neck, and crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Thorne stared at Martha, his eyes bulging. He looked at the smoking gun in the hand of the woman who usually knitted blankets for newborns. He looked at the dead man down the hall. Did you just... Thorne couldn't finish the sentence. "He was going to shoot the oxygen tank next to Echo," Martha said, her voice flat. "Move! Contact front! More coming!" Hawk yelled, firing a burst of cover fire down the hall as 2 more figures emerged from the smoke. Bullets chewed up the drywall above their heads, showering them with white dust. "We can't make the elevator! They have the angle!" Tex shouted. Martha looked at the wall next to her, a red box housing a fire extinguisher. "Tex, cover your eyes!" Martha screamed. She raised the pistol again and fired a single shot. Not at the enemy. She shot the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall 10 feet ahead of them. Hiss! The cylinder exploded. A massive cloud of white chemical powder and compressed gas erupted, filling the hallway instantly. It was a thick, choking fog that blocked all line of sight. "Go, go, go!" Martha roared. Using the white cloud as a screen, the team surged forward. Hawk and Tex pushed the gurney, their boots slipping on the powder. Thorne hacked and coughed, clutching the blood bag to his chest, running blindly behind Martha. They reached the service elevator. Martha slammed her hand onto the call button, then realized it wouldn't work with the power cut. "The manual override!" She jammed the barrel of the gun into the seam of the doors and pried. Hawk grabbed the other side. With a grunt of effort, they forced the heavy steel doors open. The car was there, waiting in the dark. They shoved the gurney inside. Thorne scrambled in after it. Martha and the Delta team backed in, weapons trained on the swirling white fog in the hallway. As the doors manually slid shut, A burst of automatic fire pinged against the metal, leaving dents that looked like angry welts. Safe for now. Inside the elevator, the only light came from the red tactical lamps on the soldiers' rifles. Thorne was sliding down the wall, his chest heaving. He looked up at Martha. She was checking the slide of her pistol, her face smeared with white extinguisher powder and blood. She looked terrifying. She looked magnificent. "Who are you?" Thorne whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and reverence. "You're not Maddie." Martha looked at him. She adjusted her glasses, which were crooked from the recoil. "I'm the nurse supervisor," she said calmly. "And you're late for rounds, doctor? We're going to the basement." The freight elevator shuddered to a halt, the metal groaning as it settled into the foundation of St. Jude Memorial. When the doors slid open, they were not greeted by the sterile white of the hospital above, but by a blast of humid, stagnant air that smelled of wet lint, industrial lubricant, and 70 years of dust. "Welcome to the dungeon," Martha whispered, stepping out into the gloom. This was the sub-basement, a sprawling network of service tunnels, laundry chutes, and high-pressure steam pipes that ran like arteries beneath the city. While the upper floors were designed for healing, this place was built for maintenance. It was a chaotic maze of shadows and hissing valves, a place Dr. Thorne had never visited in his 5 years of residency. "I didn't even know this floor existed," Thorne murmured, clutching the portable ventilator as if it were a holy relic. The battery light on the device blinked green, steady for now. "You never had to," Martha said, her eyes scanning the dim corridor, illuminated by flickering cage bulbs. "This is where the dirty work happens. Follow the yellow pipes. They lead to the old boiler room." "Contact rear!" Breaker, the rear guard, hissed. "I hear boots in the shaft. They're rappelling down the elevator cables." "They're fast," Colonel Hawk noted, his face grim in the red wash of his tactical light. "Professional. They know we can't go up." "We don't need to go up," Martha said, picking up her pace. Despite her limp, she moved with a certainty that commanded the group. "We just need to make it impossible for them to follow." They hurried down a narrow corridor lined with canvas carts overflowing with soiled linens. The walls were weeping with condensation. Martha stopped abruptly at a janitor's supply cage. The padlock was rusted, but Martha didn't ask for help. She picked up a heavy pipe wrench from a nearby workbench and smashed the lock in one swing. She threw the gate open and began rummaging through the shelves. "Julian," she barked, "put the ventilator down. I need your brain." Thorne rushed to her side. "What? What do we need?" Martha shoved 2-gallon jugs into his chest. One was industrial-strength bleach. The other was concentrated ammonia. "Chemistry 101, doctor," Martha said, her eyes hard. "What happens when you mix sodium hypochlorite with ammonia?" Thorne's eyes widened behind his glasses. "Chloramine gas. It's toxic. It causes immediate respiratory distress, burning of the mucosa, potential pulmonary edema." "Exactly," Martha cut him off. "It's a riot control agent for people on a budget. Mix it. Now." She pointed to a mop bucket near the narrowest choke point of the hallway. Thorne hesitated for a fraction of a second, the Hippocratic oath warring with survival instinct, but the sound of heavy boots hitting the concrete floor back at the elevator shaft made his decision for him. He uncapped the bottles. "Pour the bleach first," Thorne said, his voice trembling but his hands steadying as the science took over. "Then the ammonia. We need to run the second they combine." "Do it!" Hawk ordered, ushering Echo's gurney past the choke point. Thorne poured the chemicals. A thick, noxious vapor began to rise instantly from the bucket, swirling like a malevolent spirit. The smell was sharp enough to sting the eyes even from 10 feet away. "Move!" Martha grabbed Thorne's sleeve. They sprinted around the corner, sealing a heavy fire door behind them, just as the first shouts of the pursuing mercenaries echoed down the hall. A moment later, the shouts turned into violent, hacking coughs and retching sounds. The gas was doing its work. They slowed to a walk in the next section of the tunnel. The air here was cooler, vibrating with a low, deep thrumming sound. "We bought maybe 5 minutes," Hawk assessed. "They have gas masks. Once they clear the vapor, they'll be coming harder." Thorne walked beside Martha. He looked at the old woman, really looked at her. Her scrub top was stained with grease and blood. Her hair was coming loose from its bun. She looked like a grandmother who had been through a war, which he realized was exactly what she was. "Why?" Thorne asked softly, the question hanging in the humid air. Martha didn't look at him. "Why what, Julian?" "You could have been chief of surgery anywhere in the world," Thorne said, gesturing to her hands. "I saw what you did upstairs. That wasn't just training. That was genius. Why hide down here? Why wipe floors and let people like me treat you like dirt?" Martha stopped. She leaned against a cold concrete wall to take the weight off her bad hip. She looked at the scars on her hands, faint white lines that mapped a history of violence. "Do you know what glory smells like, Doctor?" Martha asked quietly. Thorne shook his head. "It smells like copper," she said, her voice distant. "It smells like wet iron and burnt hair. When you save a life in a hospital, the family brings you flowers. They call you a hero. When you save a life where I came from, you usually have to kill 3 other people to do it. You don't get flowers. You get nightmares." She looked up at him, her blue eyes incredibly sad. "I didn't want the glory, Julian. I wanted the quiet. I wanted to wash my hands and have them actually be clean. Being a nobody was the only way I could sleep at night." Thorne swallowed hard, shame burning in his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Martha patted his arm. It was a motherly gesture, strange and comforting in the hellish tunnel. "You're learning. That's enough." "Ma'am," Tex called out from the front. "Dead end." They had reached the end of the tunnel. A pair of heavy shielded doors blocked their path. A faded warning sign read, "Caution. High magnetic field. Restricted area." "It's not a dead end," Martha said, pushing off the wall. "It's the kill box." The old MRI suite, Thorne realized. They decommissioned this 5 years ago when they built the new wing. "They moved the scanning equipment," Martha corrected. "But they never quenched the magnet. It was too expensive to drain the helium safely, so they just locked the doors and left it running." She turned to Colonel Hawk and the Delta team. "The magnet is a 3 Tesla superconductor," she explained rapidly. "It is always on. Anything ferromagnetic, steel, iron, nickel, will be ripped out of your hands with a force of 2,000 pounds. Hawk nodded, understanding immediately. He tapped his earpiece. "Team, holster sidearms, blades only, ceramic knives if you have them. If you have steel, leave it in the hall." "We're going to lure them inside?" Thorne asked, terrified. "We're going to invite them to dinner," Martha said grimly. "Get Echo in the corner, behind the shielding." They pushed the gurney into the room. It was a cavernous space, dominated by the massive donut-shaped MRI machine in the center. The air hummed with a magnetic power that made the fillings in Thorne's teeth ache. "They're coming," Breaker warned. "Door breach in 3, 2... The heavy doors to the tunnel were kicked open. The Syndicate mercenaries didn't know about the magnet. They stormed in, 4 of them, aggressive and confident, their assault rifles raised to firing positions. Physics took over before tactics could. The moment they crossed the threshold, the invisible hand of the 3 Tesla field grabbed their weapons. Clang, clang, thud. The assault rifles were ripped from the mercenaries' grips as if yanked by a giant. The guns flew across the room, slamming violently into the bore of the MRI machine, sticking there like toys on a refrigerator. One mercenary, who had his weapon on a tight sling, was jerked forward off his feet, slamming face first into the machine's casing with a sickening crunch. The remaining 3 stood stunned, their hands empty, their primary advantage nullified in a split second. "Now!" Martha screamed. She slammed her palm onto a large red emergency button on the wall, the quench button. This was the fail-safe. It was designed to shut down the magnet by venting the liquid helium coolant. A deafening whoosh filled the room. Liquid helium, expanding 700 times its volume as it turned to gas, erupted from the machine's vents. The room was instantly plunged into a freezing whiteout fog. The temperature plummeted 40 degrees in seconds. "Delta! Execute!" Hawk roared. The mercenaries were blind, freezing, and disarmed. The Delta operators were not. Hawk and Tex moved through the white fog like wraiths. They didn't need guns. They had combat knives made of non-magnetic titanium and years of close-quarters combat training. Thorne couldn't see anything in the freezing mist. He could only hear the sounds of the struggle, wet thuds, grunts of exertion, and the terrifying silence of men falling. Martha stood beside him, her hand gripping his shoulder. She wasn't watching the fight. She was watching the door, waiting for the leader. The chaos lasted less than 30 seconds. As the white fog began to drift toward the ceiling vents, silence returned to the room. The 4 mercenaries lay on the floor, motionless. The Delta team stood over them, breathing hard but unharmed. "Clear," Hawk reported, wiping his blade on his pant leg. Thorne stared at the scene, his breath misting in the freezing air. He looked at the guns stuck to the magnet, then at the bodies, then at the old nurse who had orchestrated the entire symphony of violence. "We need to keep moving," Martha said, shivering slightly as the adrenaline faded. "The helium won't last forever, and neither will our luck." The service tunnels beneath St. Jude Memorial were rapidly losing their sanctuary status. The freezing fog from the quenched MRI machine was drifting down the corridor behind them, a ghostly reminder of the violence that had just taken place. Martha led the group toward the radiology sublevel, her limp more pronounced now. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the surgery and the firefight was beginning to ebb, leaving behind the jagged ache of arthritis and old shrapnel wounds in her hip. "We're almost there," Martha wheezed, her breath visible in the cooling air. The X-ray archive bunker, lead-lined walls, steel blast doors. It was built during the Cold War scare. It's the safest place in the city. Dr. Thorne was supporting the head of the gurney, his face smeared with soot and chemical powder. He looked at the back of the old nurse's head, at the gray hair coming loose from its clip, and felt a profound sense of shame for every time he had ignored her in the hallway. They reached the heavy blast door. Colonel Hawk spun the locking wheel, the rusted hinges screaming as the door swung open. They pushed Sergeant Echo inside. It was a dusty, cramped room filled with shelves of yellowing film jackets, but it was a fortress. "Secure," Hawk grunted, checking the perimeter. "We can hold this room until the cavalry arrives." "If the cavalry is coming," Tex muttered, checking his ammo count. "We're down to 2 mags each." Before Martha could respond, a sound cut through the heavy air of the basement. It didn't come from the tunnels. It came from the ceiling. Screech! Static hissed through the hospital's emergency public address system, followed by a voice. It wasn't the robotic calm of a standard announcement. It was smooth, cultured, and dripping with venom. "Nurse Caldwell," the voice echoed, bouncing off the concrete walls. "Or do you prefer the shepherd? My men tell me you've been very inhospitable." Martha froze. She looked up at the speaker grate, her jaw tightening. "That's Vargas," Colonel Hawk whispered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Head of the syndicate cell. He's not a soldier. He's a butcher in a tailored suit." "I know you can hear me, Martha," Vargas's voice continued, casual as a conversation over tea. "You're hiding in the basement. Clever, but you forgot something. Or rather, someone." There was a scuffle over the intercom, the sound of a heavy blow, and then a pained, wheezing groan. "Tell her your name, old man," Vargas commanded. "Go to hell," a weak, raspy voice spat out. "Gus," Martha whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mr. Gus here is quite resilient," Vargas purred. "But everyone breaks. You have the package, Martha. I want the soldier. Bring me Echo, and the old man lives. Stay in your hole, and I will start removing pieces of Mr. Gus. I'll start with the hands. He won't need them to beg." The intercom clicked off, leaving a silence heavier than the lead walls around them. Martha didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes for 1 second, inhaled deeply, and opened them again. The warmth was gone from her face. The grandmotherly nurse was gone. "Tex, Breaker," Martha ordered, her voice devoid of tremors. "Move the shelves against the door once I leave. Do not open it unless you hear the code phrase, sunrise." "You're not going up there," Hawk stepped in front of her, his massive frame blocking the door. "That's a suicide run, ma'am. Vargas will kill you the second he sees you." "He won't kill me," Martha said, adjusting her glasses. "He wants the satisfaction of winning. He wants to look the legend in the eye and see fear. That buys me time." "Time for what?" Hawk demanded. "Time to end it," she replied. She turned to Dr. Thorne. The young doctor was standing by the gurney, looking terrified. He stepped forward, grabbing her arm. His hands, usually so careful with instruments, were desperate. "Martha, no," Thorne pleaded. "You can't do this. You're a nurse. You're not one of them." Martha looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his tear-streaked face. She smiled, a genuine soft smile that transformed her face. "I was never just a nurse, Julian," she said softly. "And you were never just a doctor. We are the people who stand between death and the door." She reached up and unclipped her hospital ID badge from her scrub top. It was a simple piece of plastic. Martha Caldwell, RN, supervisor. She pressed it into Thorne's hand, curling his fingers around it. "Keep this for me," she whispered. "If I don't come back to the desk, remember what you learned tonight. You are a brilliant doctor, Julian. Your hands are gifted. Just lose the ego. It takes up too much room in the OR." Thorne choked back a sob, nodding rapidly. I promise, Maddie." Martha turned back to Hawk. The colonel looked at her, his steel eyes filled with a conflict between duty and respect. He pulled a K-bar combat knife from his vest, a wicked, serrated blade of black steel. "Take it," Hawk said. Martha shook her head. "He'll search me for heavy weapons. I need something smaller." She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small sealed packet. She tore it open with her teeth. It was a Falmers 10 surgical scalpel, small, sharp, invisible in a closed fist. "Lock the door behind me," Martha commanded. She squeezed past Hawk and stepped out into the corridor. She didn't look back. She began the long, painful climb up the emergency stairs toward the lobby. The main lobby of St. Jude Memorial was a ruin. The blast from the initial breach had shattered the reception desk and blown out the decorative partitions. The only light came from the lightning flashing outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. The storm was raging harder now. Rain lashed against the glass in sheets, and the black water of the bay churned violently below. The hospital was built on a pier structure, and tonight it felt like the ocean was trying to reclaim it. In the center of the room, sitting on a waiting room chair that had been pulled into the open, was Gus. He looked small and broken. His face was swollen, blood matting his gray beard. A mercenary stood behind him, a gun pressed to the back of the old man's head. And standing by the window, watching the lightning, was Vargas. Vargas was a man who looked like he had been cut from a magazine page and pasted into a war zone. He was slender, wearing a charcoal Italian suit that cost more than Martha made in a year. His hair was slicked back, and his face was handsome in a sharp reptilian way. He held a pistol loosely in one hand, sipping from a bottle of water with the other. Martha walked into the lobby. She didn't sneak. She walked with the heavy, uneven rhythm of her bad hip. Thump, drag, thump. "You're late," Vargas said, not turning around. He watched her reflection in the glass. "I take the stairs," Martha said, stopping 10 feet away. "Elevators are for patients." Vargas turned. He smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "So this is her, the angel of Kandahar, the shepherd." He chuckled, a dry sound. "You look like my grandmother. If my grandmother smelled like bleach and desperation." "Let him go, Vargas," Martha said, pointing at Gus. "He's a homeless vet. He's nothing to you." "He's leverage," Vargas shrugged. "And leverage is everything in business. Where is the sergeant?" "Secure," Martha said. "You'll never get into that bunker. It's designed to survive a nuclear strike. Your toys won't scratch it." Vargas's smile faltered. He stepped toward Gus, pulling a long, curved knife from his belt. He placed the blade against Gus's trembling hand, resting on the arm of the chair. "I don't need to get in," Vargas whispered. "I just need you to open the door, and you will open it, Martha. Or I will cut this man apart, piece by piece, while you watch, starting with the thumb." Gus looked up at Martha. His left eye was swollen shut, but the right one was clear. "Don't do it, Commander," Gus wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Don't you give him a damn inch. Let him cut. I don't need hands to salute." Martha's heart broke, but her face remained stone. She looked at the mercenary behind Gus. She looked at Vargas. She calculated the distance. 10 feet. Too far for a lunge with a bad leg. She slowly raised her hands in the air. "Okay," Martha said, her voice cracking with feigned defeat. "Okay. You win." Vargas grinned, the thrill of victory lighting up his eyes. "Smart choice." "I'll take you to them," Martha said, lowering her head submissively. "Just don't hurt him, please." She took a step forward, limping heavily, looking frail and beaten. But inside her right palm, tucked tight against the lifeline, was the scalpel. The plastic handle was slippery with her own sweat, but the blade was cold and ready. "Come here, Martha," Vargas beckoned, lowering his knife slightly, his arrogance blinding him to the predator that was limping toward him. "Come and be a good nurse." Martha took another step. Outside, a massive bolt of lightning struck the water, illuminating the lobby in a blinding flash of white light. In that split second of illumination, Vargas saw it. He didn't see a tired old woman. He saw the tension in her neck. He saw the shift in her weight. He saw the shepherd preparing to strike the wolf. But he was too close. The lightning flash that had illuminated the lobby faded, plunging the room back into the gloom of the storm, lit only by the strobe light effect of the flashing emergency strobes and the jagged arcs of electricity outside. Vargas stood confident, the tip of his curved knife resting casually against the pulse point of old Gus's neck. He watched Martha limp closer, her hands raised in surrender, her posture that of a defeated, broken woman. "That's far enough," Vargas commanded, his voice fighting to be heard over the roar of the thunder. "Kneel!" Martha stopped. She was 5 feet away. The rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling glass sounded like machine gun fire. "I'm old, Vargas," Martha said, her voice trembling. She leaned heavily on her good leg, letting her shoulders slump further. "My knees don't work like they used to. Let me just sit." Vargas laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound. "You play the victim well, Shepherd, but I know what you did in the basement. You froze my men. You gassed them." He stepped away from Gus, just an inch, turning his body slightly to address her fully. He wanted to savor this. He wanted the legendary operator to see his victory in high definition. "Do you know why I'm here, Martha?" Vargas asked, gesturing with his free hand to the massive structural pillars that held the hospital roof up. "It's not just for the sergeant, it's for the architecture." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a device. It looked like a heavy industrial remote with a digital screen glowing ominous red. "C4, Vargas explained, tapping the screen. "Plastic explosives, shaped charges on the 4 main load-bearing columns of the pier foundation. When I leave, I don't just leave a body. I drop this entire hospital into Elliott Bay. The water washes everything clean. No evidence, no witnesses, just a tragic structural failure due to the storm." Martha's blood ran cold. He wasn't just a killer, he was a terrorist. He was going to drown 300 patients, nurses, and doctors to cover a single assassination. "You're insane," Martha whispered. "I'm efficient," Vargas corrected. "Now, on your knees, or the old man bleeds." He turned back to Gus, raising the knife. It was the moment, the only moment she would get. Vargas had made the classic mistake of youth and arrogance. He looked at Martha's face, not her hands. He looked at her limp, not her balance. "I said sit," Vargas barked, distracted by his own monologue. Martha feigned a stumble. She lurched forward as if her bad hip had finally given out. Vargas sneered, lowering his guard slightly, expecting her to collapse. She didn't collapse. She coiled. The stumble transformed into a lunge. Martha didn't use strength. She used velocity. Her right hand, the one he thought was empty, snapped forward like the strike of a cobra. She didn't aim for his chest or his throat. He was wearing Kevlar under that Italian suit. She aimed for the only vulnerability he couldn't armor. The Suffer 10 surgical scalpel is a precision instrument designed to part flesh with zero resistance. Martha drove the blade into Vargas's left eye. "Ah!" The scream was not human. It was the sound of a predator suddenly becoming prey. Vargas thrashed back, his hands flying to his face, the knife dropping from his grip as shock overrode his nervous system. "Gus, run!" Martha screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. But Gus didn't run. The old veteran, beaten and battered, saw his opening. The mercenary guarding him had been distracted by Vargas's scream, turning his head for a split second. Gus roared, a sound that belonged to a man 40 years younger, and threw his body at the mercenary's legs. "Get some!" Gus yelled, tackling the guard around the knees. It wasn't enough to take the heavy man down, but it was enough to unbalance him. The mercenary staggered, raising his rifle butt to smash Gus's skull. Then, a golden blur shot out from beneath the reception desk. Barnaby, the therapy dog, who had been cowering from the thunder for hours, saw his favorite human being attacked. The fear vanished, replaced by the ancient wolf-like instinct to protect the pack. Barnaby didn't bark. He launched himself into the air, his jaws clamping down on the mercenary's forearm. Crunch. The mercenary howled, dropping the rifle as 80 pounds of golden retriever hung from his arm, shaking violently. "Good boy!" Gus yelled, scrambling away. In the center of the room, the duel between the shepherd and the wolf continued. Vargas was blind on one side, blood pouring down his expensive suit, but he was still dangerous. He swung a backhand blindly, his fist connecting with Martha's shoulder. The impact sent her spinning. She crashed into a decorative planter, pottery shattering around her. Pain flared in her hip, white-hot and blinding. "I will kill you!" Vargas shrieked, clutching his bleeding eye. "I will kill all of you!" He fumbled with the detonator in his hand. His thumb found the switch. Beep! The red numbers on the screen began to race down. Euro 30, Euro 29. "It's armed!" Vargas laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. 30 seconds! You can't stop it. It's hardwired." Martha looked at the timer. She looked at the pillars. There was no time to find the charges, no time to evacuate. She looked at the massive glass window behind Vargas. It was already spiderwebbed with cracks from the storm's fury. "Gus!" Martha yelled, pulling herself up. "Get the dog! Get to the stairwell! Now!" "Commander!" "That is an order, soldier!" Martha screamed, her voice cracking with finality. Gus grabbed Barnaby's collar and dragged the growling dog toward the heavy fire doors. He looked back once, tears mixing with the blood on his face, before disappearing into the stairwell. Martha turned to Vargas. He was staggering, trying to clear the blood from his good eye, holding the detonator up like a trophy. Euro 15. Euro 14. "We go together," Vargas hissed, pulling a backup pistol from his ankle holster. Martha didn't give him the chance to aim. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan B. She only had physics. She charged. She put her head down and drove her shoulder into Vargas's chest. It was the desperate tackle of a woman who had nothing left to lose. They hit the glass together. The window, weakened by hours of 70-mile-per-hour winds, gave way with a sound like a gunshot. Crash. The world dissolved into wind and rain. They were falling. The sensation was weightless and terrifying. They plummeted from the third story into the darkness of the storm. The wind screamed in Martha's ears, tearing at her clothes. Vargas screamed, his arms flailing. He grabbed Martha's scrub top, his fingers digging into the fabric. He was trying to pull her close, to make sure the fall killed them both. 0:05. Martha saw the timer blinking in his hand. She saw the black churning water rushing up to meet them. She knew that if they hit the water together, the bomb or the impact would kill her. She needed separation. In midair, defying gravity and age, Martha planted her good foot against Vargas's chest. She pushed. She kicked with every ounce of strength she had left in her 62-year-old body. "Let go!" she gritted out. The fabric of her scrub top tore. Vargas was shoved backward, away from her, clutching the detonator. 0:02. They hit the water. The cold was instantaneous and paralyzing. It was like hitting a concrete wall. Martha plunged deep into the bay, the salt water stinging her eyes, the darkness swallowing her whole. Above her, on the surface, or perhaps just a few feet away in the air, the timer hit 0. Euro was 0. Boom! The sound was muffled underwater, a dull, bone-shaking thump that felt like a giant fist squeezing her entire body. But the shockwave was real. It hit Martha like a freight train. It tossed her through the water, tumbling her end over end. Her head struck something hard. Debris from the hospital, and her vision flashed white, then black. Above the water, the explosion was apocalyptic. A massive geyser of water, fire, and steam erupted from the base of the pier. The shockwave blew out the remaining windows of the lobby 3 stories up. The floor buckled. The decorative pillars cracked but held. Vargas had been too far from the structural charges when the detonator triggered the primary pack in his hand. Or perhaps the remote signal failed to chain react due to the water. The blast didn't drop the hospital. It just blew a hole in the world. "Martha!" The fire doors to the lobby burst open. Colonel Hawk and Dr. Thorne sprinted into the room, guns raised. They were 5 seconds too late. They skid to a halt at the edge of the shattered window. The rain whipped into their faces. Dr. Thorne looked down. There was nothing but the churning black ocean, illuminated by patches of burning oil and debris floating on the surface. The waves were angry, crashing against the pylons, swallowing everything in their path. "No!" Thorne whispered, dropping his gun. He gripped the edge of the broken window frame, ignoring the glass cutting into his palms. "No, no, no." Hawk holstered his weapon and ripped a flare from his vest. He cracked it and threw it down into the water. The red light hissed, bobbing in the waves, illuminating nothing but foam and darkness. "Shepard!" Hawk roared into the storm. Only the wind answered, howling a mournful dirge over the empty sea. 6 months is a long time in the life of a city, but in the life of a hospital, it is an eternity. St. Jude Memorial had changed. The scars of the explosion that had shattered the pier were gone, replaced by reinforced steel and a sweeping wall of tempered glass that offered an uninterrupted view of Elliott Bay. The rain had finally stopped, a rare Seattle miracle, leaving the sky a brilliant, piercing blue. Inside the trauma bay, the frantic energy remained, but the soul of the room was different. Dr. Julian Thorne stood at the scrub sink, the water running over his hands. He was no longer just the attending physician. He was the chief of emergency medicine. His hair was graying at the temples, a souvenir from that long night in the basement, and the arrogance that had once defined his jawline had softened into a quiet, intense focus. Next to him stood a young, cocky resident, fresh out of med school, tapping his foot impatiently. "We have a perforated bowel in Bay 2, Chief," the resident said, checking his watch. "We need to cut. Time is muscle." Thorne turned off the water and dried his hands with methodical care. He looked at the resident, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "We will cut," Thorne said softly. "But first, we pause." "Pause? Sir, the patient is terrified," Thorne corrected him, "and we are about to invade their body. We take 1 minute. We center ourselves. We remember that we are not mechanics working on a car. We are guests in someone's life." The resident blinked, confused, but silenced by the authority in Thorne's voice. Thorne closed his eyes. His hand drifted to his pocket, where his fingers brushed against the hard plastic of an old ID badge, Martha Caldwell, RN. He kept it there, a talisman against the return of his own ego. He breathed in, counting to 10, channeling the calm of the shepherd. "Okay," Thorne opened his eyes. "Let's go to work." Down in the main lobby, the transformation was even more profound. The reception desk, once a barrier of indifference, was now an open, welcoming station. Standing guard by the main entrance was a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine for distinguished gentlemen. Old Gus was clean-shaven, his hair trimmed into a neat, silver fade. He wore a fitted navy blue suit with a small gold pin on the lapel that read, "Head of Security." He wasn't sitting. He was standing tall, his back straight, scanning the room with eyes that had seen war but had finally found peace. Sitting next to him, wearing a specialized service vest, was Barnaby. The golden retriever sat with the regal bearing of a sphinx, watching the automatic doors. "Morning, Mr. Gus," a nurse called out as she passed. "Morning, Sarah," Gus replied, tipping his head. "Walk safely. Floor's a bit slick near the coffee cart." A low thumping sound began to vibrate through the glass walls. It wasn't the frantic chopping noise of a medevac. It was deeper, heavier. Barnaby's ears perked up. He let out a soft woof. Gus smiled. Right on time. Outside, on the newly paved helipad, a Black Hawk helicopter descended. It didn't land with the urgency of a combat extraction. It touched down gently, the rotors slowing to a lazy spin. The hospital administrator, a nervous man named Jenkins, came running out of his office. "What is this? We have no inbound trauma. Who authorized a military landing?" Gus stepped in front of him, his hand raised calmly. "I did, sir. Visiting hours?" The side door of the Black Hawk slid open. Colonel Hawk Sterling stepped out first. He was wearing his dress blues, the medals on his chest gleaming in the sunlight. He reached back and offered a hand to the man behind him. Sergeant Echo stepped onto the tarmac. He looked nothing like the pale, dying boy who had been carried into the ER 6 months ago. He was walking on his own, dressed in a crisp uniform. He took a deep breath of the sea air, wincing slightly as his lungs expanded against the scar tissue in his chest, but his smile was blinding. Behind them came Tex and Breaker, also in dress uniform, carrying a large, rectangular case made of polished mahogany. Dr. Thorne walked out to meet them. He didn't cringe away from the soldiers this time. He extended his hand to Colonel Hawk. "Colonel," Thorne said, "you made good time." "We had a tailwind, Doctor," Hawk replied, shaking Thorne's hand with a grip that could crush stone, but was currently filled with warmth. "Is she here?" "She's in the garden," Thorne said. "She doesn't know you're coming." The rehabilitation garden was situated on the south side of the hospital, a terrace sanctuary of greenery overlooking the water. It was filled with the scent of lavender and salt. In the center of the garden, surrounded by rose bushes, a woman sat in a motorized wheelchair. Martha Caldwell looked different. Her hair was no longer gray. It was a shocking, vibrant white, cut into a stylish bob that framed her face. She wore a thick wool sweater against the ocean breeze. Her left pant leg was pinned up neatly just above the knee, the price she had paid for the fall into the bay. The Coast Guard had pulled her out barely alive, her leg crushed by the impact and debris, but they had pulled her out. She was currently holding a pair of pruning shears, demonstrating a cut to a young nurse. It was Lily, the former intern, now wearing the badge of a registered nurse. "You have to cut at the node, Lily," Martha explained, her voice strong and clear. "If you cut too high, the stem dies. If you cut too low, you damage the bud. It's just like an artery. You have to respect the flow." "Like this?" Lily asked, making a snip. "Perfect," Martha smiled. "You have good hands, Lily. Better than mine ever were." "I doubt that," a deep voice rumbled from the path. Martha froze. She lowered the shears. Slowly she turned her wheelchair around. Standing on the garden path, framed by the blue sky and the sparkling water, stood her flock. Colonel Hawk, Tex, Breaker, and in the center, standing on his own 2 feet, Sergeant Echo. Martha's hands flew to her mouth. Tears, hot and instant, welled in her eyes. Dr. Thorne stepped forward from the group. He walked over to Martha's wheelchair. "I believe these gentlemen are looking for the shift supervisor," Thorne said gently. He moved behind her chair. "Allow me." He pushed Martha forward, stopping just a few feet from the soldiers. The wind rustled the leaves of the rose bushes. The seagulls cried overhead. But in the garden, there was only the sound of 600 pounds of military discipline snapping to attention. Crack! The heels of the Delta operators slammed together. Their right hands snapped to their brows in a salute so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. "Reporting for duty, Commander," Hawk barked, his voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't suppress. Martha trembled. She tried to push herself up, to stand on her one good leg, but Echo stepped forward. The young sergeant dropped to one knee, the same way Hawk had knelt in the rain 6 months ago. But this time, it wasn't in desperation. It was in gratitude. He placed the mahogany box on her lap. "Ma'am," Echo said softly, "they told me I died on that table. They told me the lights went out." He looked up at her, his eyes clear and bright. "But I remember your voice. You told me to fight. So I fought." He opened the box. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a silver pendant on a chain. Encased in the center of the silver was a deformed, flattened piece of lead. The sniper's bullet that Dr. Thorne and Martha had removed from his aorta. Etched into the silver around the bullet were words. Martha reached out, her fingers tracing the engraving. She read it aloud, her voice a whisper carried by the wind. "To the shepherd who guided me home." "We didn't have a medal that fit," Hawk said, stepping forward. "So we made one." Martha looked at the bullet that had almost killed him, and then at the man who was alive because she had refused to let go. She looked at Dr. Thorne, who was smiling with pride, no longer the arrogant boy, but a true healer. She looked at Gus in the distance, guarding the door. She pinned the silver pendant to her sweater, right over her heart. I'm retired, Colonel, Martha said, wiping her tears. I'm just an old woman who likes to garden. We know, Hawk smiled, but the flock always needs a shepherd, just in case. Martha looked out at the ocean. The water that had almost swallowed her was now calm, reflecting the sun like a mirror. She looked at her missing leg, then at the roses blooming around her, bright, defiant red against the gray stone. She took Dr. Thorne's hand on one side and Echo's hand on the other. Well then, Martha smiled, and for the first time in 20 years, the shadows in her eyes were completely gone. I suppose I should teach you boys how to prune a rose. It's all about where you make the cut. The laughter of the soldiers mixed with the sound of the ocean, rising up into the clear Seattle sky. The storm was over. The shepherd was home. We often walk past the Marthas in our lives, the quiet neighbors, the tired nurses, the elderly veterans sitting alone on a park bench, without a second glance. We judge them by their slow steps or their worn-out clothes, forgetting that true strength does not need to shout. Martha Caldwell teaches us that heroism isn't about the medals on your chest or the title on your badge. It is about the quiet choice to stand between the darkness and the light. It is about being a shepherd, someone who is willing to carry the weight for others, even when no one is watching and even when no one says thank you. In your own life, you don't need to be a surgeon or a soldier to be a hero. You just need to be the one who stays when everyone else runs. You just need to be the hand that reaches out in the storm. If Martha's journey from the shadows to the sunlight touched your heart today, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us share these powerful stories with more people who need hope. Do you know a quiet hero in your life? Someone who serves without asking for glory? I want to hear about them. Share this video with them to say thank you, and tell me their story in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter of courage. Now, before you go, I want to say a short prayer for you. Dear Lord, I ask you to watch over every person listening to this story right now. Just as you guided the shepherd through the storm, I pray that you guide us through our own battles. Protect our families from the wolves at the door. Give us the strength to be kind when the world is harsh, and the courage to stand firm when the waves crash against us. Heal our wounds, physical and emotional, and remind us that we are never truly alone, for you are always with us. If you receive this blessing and believe in His protection, please write Amen in the comments. Stay safe, stay strong, and God bless you.